The air in the arena felt heavy, almost suffocating, a stark contrast to the usual electric buzz that precedes a main event. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of nervous anticipation, the collective breath of 20,000 people held in a fragile stasis. The commentary team, usually a constant stream of hype and statistics, had fallen into a lull, their voices dropping to hushed tones as they struggled to fill the void left by a lackluster build-up to the night's final segment. For months, the women's division had felt like a ship without a rudder, drifting in a sea of predictable outcomes and manufactured drama. The current champion, while talented, had failed to capture the visceral, dangerous energy that had once defined the title picture. The crowd knew it, the writers knew it, and most damning of all, the locker room knew it. There was a palpable sense of fatigue, a yearning for something or someone to shatter the status quo. Fans in the front row shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at the empty entrance ramp, which seemed to stretch on for miles into the darkness. The lighting rig overhead hummed with a low, menacing drone, a subtle audio cue that something was wrong, though no one could quite place it. It wasn't the technical malfunction of a botched production. It was a deliberate atmospheric suppression. The giant LED screens, usually ablaze with vibrant motion graphics and aggressive branding, had dimmed to a dull, static gray, casting a pallid, sickly glow over the ringside area. It felt less like a wrestling show and more like the calm before a natural disaster, the barometric pressure dropping so rapidly that ears began to pop. Michael Cole, a veteran of countless shocking returns and scripted swerves, sounded genuinely unsettled. He wasn't reading from a teleprompter anymore, he was reacting to the tangible shift in the room's energy. Beside him, the color commentator tapped a pin nervously against the desk, the rhythm erratic and fast, betraying a genuine anxiety that bled through the broadcast. They were stalling, waiting for a cue that wasn't coming, or perhaps waiting for a cue they hadn't been briefed on. The audience began to murmur, a low rumble of confusion that rippled from the cheap seats down to the ringside barriers. It wasn't the excited chatter of speculation, it was the concerned whispering of a crowd realizing they had lost control of the narrative. Then, the static on the screens stopped. It didn't explode into color or cut to a video package. It simply froze. The gray noise solidified into a black void, swallowing the light in the arena until the only illumination came from the thousands of cell phone flashlights that instinctively flickered on, creating a sea of artificial stars in the sudden, artificial night. The temperature in the building seemed to plummet, the artificial chill of the air conditioning suddenly biting and harsh. There were no pyrotechnics, no countdown clock, no familiar guitar riff to signal the arrival of a savior. There was only the darkness and the growing, gnawing sensation that the WWE, a machine built on precision and spectacle, had just blinked. The sound that broke the silence wasn't music, it was a rhythmic, mechanical thud, like the slow, heavy beat of a dying heart amplified through stadium speakers. Thump, thump, thump. It vibrated in the chests of everyone in attendance, a physical sensation more than an auditory one. The crowd's confusion morphed into a collective trance, thousands of heads turning in unison toward the stage. There was no smoke, no lasers, no elaborate set piece rising from the floor. Just a single spotlight, stark and white, snapping on at the very top of the ramp. It didn't sweep the crowd. It remained fixed, illuminating a solitary figure standing perfectly still. It was her, but it wasn't the mommy they remembered. The black lipstick was gone, replaced by a bare, pale face that looked almost ghostly under the harsh light. The elaborate studied leather and purple accents that had defined her Judgment Day era were nowhere to be seen. Instead, she wore simple, utilitarian combat gear mat, black cargo pants, heavy boots, and a plain fitted tank top. Her hair, once a carefully coiffed, distinctive short cut, was longer now, unkempt and hanging loosely around her face, casting shadows that obscured her eyes. She didn't pose. She didn't flex. She didn't blow a kiss to the camera or acknowledge the fans. She just stood there, a statue of potential violence, radiating an aura of cold detachment that was far more terrifying than any snarl. As she began to walk, the music, if you could call it, that shifted. The heartbeats were joined by a low, distorted bass drone that sounded like metal grinding against metal deep underground. It was uncomfortable, dissonant, designed to put teeth on edge, walked with a slow, predatory gait. devoid of the swagger and showmanship of 2024. This wasn't a superstar making an entrance. It was an executioner walking to the gallows. The camera operators, usually instructed to get dynamic, low-angle hero shots, seemed hesitant, keeping their distance, as if afraid to intrude on her personal space. The lens flared as it caught the dead, flat look in her eyes that didn't blink, didn't search for approval, and didn't show a flicker of emotion. The commentary team was paralyzed. There were no shouts of, "Oh my God," or "She's back." Just a stunned, open mic silence that lasted for an eternity. The crowd, too, had forgotten to cheer. The initial pop that usually accompanies a return had been strangled in their throats, replaced by a mixture of awe and fear. They weren't witnessing a wrestling character. They were witnessing a person who had shed the skin of entertainment to reveal something raw and primal underneath. A few scattered chants of RHEA tried to start, but quickly died out, suffocated by the oppressive atmosphere. She reached the steel steps and didn't leap onto the apron or pose on the turnbuckle. She simply walked up the stairs, one heavy step at a time, and stepped through the ropes, bringing the cold reality of the outside world into the theatrics of the ring. Inside the ring, the current champion, confident and athletic prodigy who had carried the division for the last 8 months, looked suddenly small. She had been mid-promo when the lights went out, and she still held the microphone, her knuckles white as she gripped it. She tried to maintain her composure, puffing out her chest and stepping forward to meet the intruder, but her body language betrayed her. She was a wrestler playing a role. RHEA Ripley was a force of nature that had forgotten the script. The champion opened her mouth to speak, to cut the standard, "Who do you think you are?" line, but RHEA didn't let her get a word out. She didn't strike her. She simply walked through her personal space, shoulder-checking her with enough force to send the champion stumbling back into the corner turnbuckle. The impact was jarring because it lacked a theatrical selling of pro wrestling. It looked like a bar fight, ugly and real. The referee, sensing the volatility, moved to intervene, putting a hand on RHEA's arm to establish order. RHEA didn't even look at him. She swatted his arm away with a backhand motion that sent the official sprawling across the canvas. The bell never rang. There was no match. This was an invasion. The champion, realizing diplomacy was over, charged with a high knee strike, a move that had finished matches all year. RHEA didn't block it. She absorbed it. She took the hit to the shoulder, barely flinching, and in one fluid motion, grabbed the champion by the throat. It wasn't a chokeslam setup. It was a stranglehold. She drove the champion into the mat, not with a wrestling slam, but with a tackle that looked more like a feral animal taking down prey. The crowd gasped, a sharp intake of breath that sucked the air out of the arena. RHEA mounted her opponent, and the violence that followed was methodical and silent. There were no furious screams, no playing to the hard cam, just heavy, dull strikes, fists, and elbows raining down with a sickening thud that the ring microphones picked up with uncomfortable clarity. The champion tried to cover up, tried to scramble away, but RHEA was an anchor, a dead weight of aggression that pinned her to the canvas. Security guards rushed the ring, a wave of yellow shirts spilling over the ropes. Usually, this is the part where the returning star fights them off in a heroic display of power. RHEA didn't fight them. She simply stood up, her chest heaving slightly, and stared them down. The first guard who reached for her froze, his hand hovering inches from her arm, stopped by the sheer intensity of her glare. She looked at them not as obstacles, but as annoyances beneath her notice. She stepped over the fallen champion, who was now clutching her ribs and coughing, and looked out at the hard camera. For the first time, an expression crossed her face, not a smile, but a look of profound disappointment. She looked at the belt lying on the mat, then at the crowd, and spat on the canvas before exiting the ring, leaving a scene of absolute devastation without ever hitting a finishing move. Backstage, the atmosphere was less chaotic than it was terrified. The gorilla position, usually a hub of high fives and producer feedback, was a tomb. Triple H sat at the monitors, his headset around his neck, staring at the screen with a look that mixed creative satisfaction with genuine concern. He hadn't written the swatting of the referee. He hadn't called for the security to freeze. Script had been RHEA returns, stare down, cut to black. What had just happened was an improvisation that blurred the lines of liability. Agents and producers scrambled, whispering furiously into their cums, trying to get a medical team to the ring for the champion, who was still down, selling or perhaps experiencing a genuine rib injury. Rhea walked through the curtain, and the backstage area parted like the Red Sea. Mid-card wrestlers, who were usually joking around, near the catering tables fell silent, pressing their backs against the concrete walls to give her a wide berth. There were no welcome-back hugs, no handshakes. The cameramen, following her for the inevitable digital exclusive clip, kept a zoom lens distance, afraid to get too close. She walked past the interview set, where a terrified backstage correspondent stood with a microphone, ready to ask the standard, "What was going on in your head?" question. The correspondent opened her mouth, saw the look in Rhea's eyes, and wisely decided to lower the mic, letting her pass without a word. Inside the locker room, the mood was one of existential dread. The women's roster, huddled around a monitor, watched the replay in silence. They saw the lack of wasted motion, the absence of showmanship, the pure efficiency of the violence. It wasn't just that Rhea was back. It was that she had evolved into something that didn't fit the current ecosystem. The work rate era, the era of 5-star athletic contests and cooperative sequences, suddenly felt obsolete. Rhea had brought a street fight to a ballet recital. A young NXT call-up whispered, "Is she supposed to do that?" And a veteran merely shook her head, unable to provide an answer, because the rule book they all played by had seemingly just been burned. Social media was already melting down. The clips were viral within seconds, not because of a catchy catchphrase or a cool move, but because of the uncomfortable realism. "Is this a shoot?" trended immediately. "She looks dangerous," trended alongside it. The WWE PR team was already drafting statements, trying to spin the intensity as part of a new, gritty direction, but the panic in their typing was real. They had wanted a buzz. They got a shockwave. Rhea found her own locker room a private dressing room reserved for top stars, and slammed the door shut. The sound echoed down the concrete hallway, a final period on a statement that no one quite knew how to read. Inside, she sat alone, staring at her hands, the adrenaline fading to leave a cold, hollow emptiness. The show went off the air without a closing copyright graphic, fading to black on the image of the empty ring and the fallen title belt. But the story didn't end on the television screen. An hour later, as the arena emptied and the custodial staff began sweeping up the popcorn and discarded signs, a notification pinged on millions of phones worldwide. It wasn't a WWE official post. It was from Rhea's personal Instagram, a platform that had been dormant for over a year. There was no picture, no video of her working out, no promotional graphic for a t-shirt. It was a black screen with white text, a manifesto written in the Notes app, raw and unpolished. "I didn't leave because I was hurt," the text read. "I left because I was tired of pretending. I spent years building Mommy, building a character that you could cheer for, buy dolls of, and put on your walls. I became a product. I became safe. And in doing so, I forgot what it felt like to be dangerous." The words scrolled on, stripping away the kayfabe veneer that usually protects the industry. "I watched from home. I saw you cheer for routines. I saw you chant for rehearsed gymnastics. You forgot what fear looks like. You forgot what consequences feel like. You got comfortable. Comfort is the death of greatness." It wasn't a heel promo. It was a philosophical deconstruction of the very industry she dominated. Forced the fans to look in the mirror and question their own consumption of the violence they claimed to love. Was she a villain for refusing to play the game? Or was she the only honest person left in a world of fabrication? The post concluded with a line that would be dissected on podcasts and forums for years to come, a line that shifted her from a wrestling character to a mythic figure. "I am not here to win your championships. They are props. I am here to remind you that the monster under the bed is real, and she doesn't care if you like her entrance music." Welcome to the reality check. The screen on the viewer's phone would go dark, leaving them staring at their own reflection in the black glass. The question lingered, heavy and uncomfortable. This wasn't just a return to the ring. It was a return to consequence. Rhea Ripley hadn't just unleashed herself on the WWE. She had unleashed the uncomfortable truth that in a world of scripted heroes, the most terrifying thing is a woman who has stopped acting. The video ends not with a plea to subscribe, but with that lingering, haunting silence, forcing the viewer to sit with the realization that the show they thought they knew had just been canceled, and something entirely new and entirely dangerous had taken its place.